When most people hear the words animal shelter, they picture wagging tails, hopeful eyes, and a kind-hearted team working tirelessly to give pets a second chance. And while there is truth in that image, it's not the whole picture. The reality of what happens inside animal shelters, especially the ones that aren't featured in feel-good social media reels, is far more complicated, far more emotional, and at times deeply unsettling. Let's start with the first thing that hits you when you walk into many shelters: the noise. It's not the peaceful kind, it's overwhelming. Barking, whining, cages clanking, hundreds of voices all crying for attention at once. Each sound is a story: a scared pup dumped after the holidays, a cat surrendered because a landlord said no pets, an old dog left behind because the family couldn't afford his medication. And they don't know why they're here. All they know is that they're not home. But even before an animal ever ends up in a shelter, there's often a long trail of heartbreak behind it. Some are rescued from hoarding situations, abuse cases, or puppy mills. Others are born into homelessness, strays trying to survive traffic, hunger, and cold nights. And then there are the ones who once had homes. They were loved until they weren't. Shelters, for all their compassion, are overwhelmed. Most are underfunded, understaffed, and facing more demand than they can handle. On paper, they're meant to be temporary stops, a safe haven before adoption. But for some animals, they become the final destination. Especially in overcrowded city shelters, the harsh truth is that space and time are limited. When a facility is full and more animals keep arriving, difficult decisions have to be made. And they're not made lightly. Shelter workers don't want to euthanize animals. It breaks them every time they do. But with no adopters, no fosters, and limited resources, sometimes they feel like they have no other choice. Still, this isn't a story of villains and victims. The people who work in shelters are some of the most dedicated, emotionally resilient individuals you'll ever meet. They clean cages, walk dogs in all weather, hold trembling animals through fear, and cry in their cars after long shifts. They celebrate every adoption like it's a miracle, and often foster animals themselves when space runs out. But there's more. What about the no-kill shelters? Are they really the solution? What happens behind the scenes of those that promise happy endings but quietly struggle to uphold them? And where do animals go when they don't get adopted? Those are the deeper, more uncomfortable truths we need to talk about next. Because once we pull back the curtain, we see a system that's not broken by intention, but by overload, by neglect from those outside it, and by the silence of those who don't know what's really happening. And that's what we'll explore in the next part. Stick with me. So let's talk about no-kill shelters. It's a comforting phrase, right? It makes us feel better, like we're supporting places where animals are safe no matter what. And to some extent, that's true. No-kill shelters aim to avoid euthanizing healthy or treatable animals, which sounds like the dream. But here's the part most people don't realize. No-kill doesn't mean every animal lives, and it doesn't mean the shelter isn't struggling. In fact, many no-kill shelters are constantly juggling their own ethical dilemmas. What happens when a dog is aggressive and unadoptable, or when a cat is terminally ill and in pain? These decisions still have to be made, quietly, carefully, and often with heavy hearts. And when a shelter is determined to keep its no-kill status, it sometimes turns animals away. That's right, if they're full or lack the resources to care for an animal long-term, they may simply say no. So where do those rejected animals go? Back to the streets, or to open intake shelters where the rules are different? Open intake shelters take in every animal, regardless of space. They're the ones carrying the weight of the system, the ones who see the highest numbers, the worst cases, and the hardest choices. And while people may criticize them for euthanasia statistics, what we often forget is this: they're doing the work nobody else wants to face. And then there's the adopters, the good ones, the hopeful ones, and unfortunately, the careless ones. Some people walk into a shelter ready to change a life, but others, they see a cute puppy, sign the paperwork, and a week later, that same dog is back. Returned because it barked too much, or shed too much, or because the family didn't realize how much work a pet would be. It's heartbreaking for the staff. Imagine being the person who watched that dog wag its tail all the way out the door, only to see it returned, confused and rejected. shelters are also not immune to misinformation and bad press. One viral video of a barking kennel can spark outrage without context. And meanwhile, the reality is that the staff are probably working double shifts, running on donations, and doing their best with what little they have. It's messy, it's emotional, and sometimes it feels like a battle that never ends. But the real tragedy, most of this stays hidden. We don't see the overwhelmed intake rooms. We don't see the late-night vet visits or the workers crying after euthanizing a pet they held dear. We see the adoption photos, the happy stories. And those are real, but they're just one side. The question is, how did we get here? Why are so many animals still ending up in shelters? And what can actually be done to change this system before it collapses under its own weight? That's what we're going to get into next. To understand why animal shelters are constantly on the edge of collapse, we have to look at the bigger picture, one that starts long before an animal ever reaches a kennel. At the heart of this crisis is overpopulation. Too many animals, not enough homes. It's that simple and that overwhelming. Each year, millions of animals are born, many into homes that can't or won't keep them. Backyard breeders, accidental litters, pet stores that sell animals like toys, it all contributes to a pipeline that floods shelters non-stop. And when you mix that with people surrendering pets for preventable reasons, like a move, a new baby, or behavior issues they never trained for, the shelter system becomes a revolving door. But here's something not everyone knows. Spay and neuter programs are one of the most powerful tools we have. They reduce the number of unwanted litters. They lighten the load on shelters. They literally save lives. Yet access to these services isn't equal. In some communities, they're expensive. In others, they're simply unavailable. And guess who suffers? The animals. Always the animals. Then there's the myth that shelter pets are damaged goods, that they all have problems, that they're too old, too scared, too sick. But the truth, most are just unlucky. Many are loving, loyal, and desperate for a second chance. Some have lived in homes for years before being tossed aside. Others have known nothing but hardship, and all they want is someone to choose them, not for a photo op, but for life. Unfortunately, the wellness industry for pets doesn't help either. Designer dogs, Instagram-perfect breeds. Buzzwords like hypoallergenic or teacup get thrown around without understanding the cost, both financial and ethical. Puppy mills capitalize on that demand, churning out animals for profit, often in filthy, abusive conditions. And guess what happens when those puppies don't sell? Or when their health problems emerge? Yep, they end up in shelters. It's a cycle. One we've built, one we've normalized, and one we have the power to change. But change doesn't mean grand gestures. It starts with simple human choices. Adopting instead of shopping. Fostering an animal even just for a week. Donating to your local shelter. Not just money, but time, blankets, supplies. Spreading the word. Being the voice for animals who have none. Because while this may sound bleak, and at times it is, there's also so much hope. Every pet that finds a home, every volunteer who gives their time, every family that chooses to adopt instead of scroll endlessly for a breeder, they're all part of the solution. And in the final part of this video, we're going to talk about that hope. We're going to meet the heroes who show up day after day, and we're going to talk about what the future could look like if more people simply knew what really goes on behind shelter doors. So now that you know the reality, the heartbreak, the pressure, the myths, it's time we shift focus. Because while the shelter system is deeply flawed, it's also filled with people who are quietly doing the impossible every single day. Walk into any shelter and you'll meet them. Volunteers who come in after their 9-to-5 jobs to walk dogs, cuddle cats, clean cages. Staff who skip lunch because a sick animal needs a vet visit. People who cry over every goodbye, even if it's a happy one. They aren't in it for the money, there often isn't much money. They do it because they believe every life matters, even the old ones, even the broken ones. Then there are the foster heroes. The ones who open their homes to pets too scared, too sick, or too young to survive in a noisy kennel. Fosters are the hidden backbone of rescue. They teach dogs to trust again. They nurse kittens through the night. They give animals the one thing a shelter often can't: a taste of normal life. And guess what? You don't need a giant house or endless free time to be part of this. Even a weekend foster can be the difference between life and death for an animal who just needs a break from the noise. That's how powerful just one person can be. Let's not forget the adopters either, the ones who come in, not looking for perfection, but connection. The ones who walk past the barking puppies and pick the shy senior in the corner. Who truly commit, to giving an animal a forever home. Those are the real success stories. And they don't always make headlines, but they change lives in ways that matter. But we need more of them. The truth is, animal shelters can't survive without the community. Without people willing to look past the polished pet store ads and the influencer breeds. Without people who understand that rescue isn't always pretty, but it's always worth it. So here's the big question I want to leave you with. What kind of world do we want for animals? One where they're treated like disposable objects? Or one where they're valued, protected, and loved, even when they're no longer cute, no longer young, no longer perfect? Because change isn't impossible, it's already happening. In cities with strong spay-neuter programs, shelters are seeing fewer intakes. In towns where fostering is embraced, animals get adopted faster. When the public shows up, really shows up, animals thrive. You don't have to be a superhero, you just have to care. You just have to act. And maybe, just maybe, that starts today.